The city of Rome stood in silence. The marble temples still gleamed under the sun, but the heart of the Republic had stopped beating. Julius Caesar was dead. His blood still dried on the floor of the Senate, his legacy burning in the hands of men who claimed to avenge him. They said they killed a tyrant, but all they did was set fire to the world. The assassins of Caesar, Brutus, Cassius were hunted down like ghosts, their names soon erased from glory. And from the ashes of that chaos, two men rose, both claiming to be the true heir of Rome's destiny. One was Mark Antony, Caesar's most trusted general, a soldier of strength and passion, forged in battle and fire. The other was Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, young, quiet, and patient, with eyes that saw farther than any general's sword. At first, they stood together, bound by vengeance. Together they hunted Caesar's killers and restored order through blood. But unity born of war rarely survives peace. The closer they came to power, the more they saw each other. Not as brothers, but as rivals. Antony ruled from the east, rich, powerful, adored by soldiers and kings. Octavian ruled from Rome, cold, strategic, shaping the Senate with fear and silence. Between them stretched not just distance, but two visions of the world. Antony still dreamed of conquest. Octavian dreamed of control. And far to the south, across the deserts of Egypt, a queen waited, watching, listening, calculating. Her name was Cleopatra, last ruler of the ancient pharaohs, queen of the Nile, mistress of diplomacy and survival. She had seen Caesar fall. She knew what Rome's hunger could do. But Cleopatra also knew that Rome's greatest weakness was not its enemies. It was its men. When Antony called for her to meet him, she did not hesitate. She saw in him not a conqueror, but an opportunity. For Antony needed wealth, ships, and legitimacy, and she needed protection for her throne. Two ambitions met under the golden sun of the East, each cloaked in charm, each planning to outlast the other. Rome called Antony a hero. Egypt called Cleopatra a goddess. But history would soon call them something else. The lovers who destroyed a republic. Because in the shadow of Caesar's death, a greater storm was coming. A storm that would sink fleets, shatter crowns, and wash away 1,000 years of freedom. And on its horizon, one name waited: Actium. The wind carried the scent of myrrh and salt as the ships of Cleopatra VII sailed north along the river. Golden sails glimmered beneath the Mediterranean sun. Each vessel moved like a floating temple, its oars flashing like mirrors across the water. At the head of this procession, seated on a gilded throne beneath a silk canopy, sat the Queen of Egypt, serene and unshaken. She was on her way to meet Mark Antony. In 41 BC, Antony, now ruler of Rome's eastern provinces, summoned Cleopatra to answer for her neutrality in Caesar's civil wars. But Cleopatra was no one's subject. She came not to explain, she came to enchant. When her ship reached the harbor of Tarsus, Antony expected a queen begging forgiveness. What he saw instead was myth. Perfumed smoke drifted from braziers. Musicians played flutes in harmony with the rhythm of the oars. As the crowd gathered, people whispered, "Aphrodite has risen from the sea." Antony, soldier of iron and thunder, forgot for a moment that he was Rome's general. Cleopatra descended the gangway, her gaze steady, her steps measured. When she spoke, her voice was soft, melodic, but each word struck like a command. "General," she said, "you summon a queen. Now what would you have of Egypt?" He could not answer. That night, they dined together beneath oil lamps that swayed in the river breeze. Wine flowed like the Nile itself. They spoke of power, of ambition, of Rome's chaos and Egypt's pride. But beneath every word was something unspoken. A challenge, a fascination, a hunger neither could name. Antony had fought wars across continents, but he had never met a mind like hers. She was clever, subtle, and fearless. Using beauty as a weapon, wit as armor, and mystery as her shield. Cleopatra, in turn, found in Antony what Caesar had never given her: warmth, laughter, and a man who ruled by heart, not calculation. By dawn, an alliance had been born, forged not in ink, but in glances. Egypt would give Antony ships and silver. Antony would give Cleopatra protection and Rome's favor. But behind every promise, both dreamed of something greater: empire. Weeks turned into months. Antony remained in Alexandria, bewitched yet willingly trapped. He abandoned Roman discipline for Egyptian luxury. Together, they staged feasts that would echo through legend, banquets of gold and flowers, night skies lit with torches, and songs that spoke of eternity. They declared themselves Dionysus and Isis reborn. To their followers they were gods. To Rome they were traitors. In the Senate, Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, smiled quietly. He sent spies, he spread rumors, he showed letters that Antony had sent to Cleopatra, pledging his loyalty to her over Rome. "Behold," Octavian told the Senate, "the man who kneels before a foreign queen." Whispers became outrage. Antony's image, once heroic, began to rot in Rome's memory. He was no longer Caesar's heir, but a fool blinded by beauty. And Cleopatra became the perfect villain, the serpent queen, the Eastern temptress. But in Alexandria, the lovers paid no mind to politics. They were building something the world had never seen, an empire ruled by two hearts instead of one crown. They believed love could rival Rome. Yet, in every love story written by destiny, there is always a cost waiting in silence. Because far across the sea, Octavian was already gathering his legions. And in the calm before war, the first winds of Actium began to rise. The storm began not with swords, but with whispers. In Rome, Octavian stood before the Senate, holding a letter written in Antony's own hand. In it were promises of kingdoms, of children crowned as rulers of the East, of a queen who called herself goddess of the sun and moon. Every word dripped with betrayal, every line another dagger into the heart of the Republic. Octavian's voice was calm, measured, and cold. He didn't accuse Antony of treason, he accused Cleopatra. He declared that Rome was not at war with one of its own, but with the woman who had bewitched him. "Egypt," he said, "has enslaved our general's heart. Now it seeks to enslave Rome." The Senate erupted. The vote was swift. War was declared not on Antony, but on Cleopatra of Egypt. It was a masterstroke of politics. By blaming her, Octavian made every Roman soldier believe they were defending their homeland, not fighting their own brothers. And Antony, bound by pride and love, had no choice but to fight beside her. In Alexandria, the queen stood by the balcony as the hot desert wind carried word of Rome's decision. Her gold bangles jingled as she turned to Antony. "So it begins," she said quietly. Antony stared toward the horizon, jaw set, his armor glinting in the sunlight. He had fought 100 battles, but never one where his heart was the prize. They prepared for war, Egypt and Rome's eastern allies against Octavian's iron machine. Ships were built, ports fortified, supplies gathered. Cleopatra ordered her treasure melted into coins to pay for fleets and soldiers. Antony summoned kings and generals who still owed him loyalty. By the summer of 31 BC, their armies met on the western coast of Greece, near the narrow straits of Actium. Antony's navy stretched across the blue water, more than 200 ships gleaming under the sun. Cleopatra commanded from her own royal barge, its sails woven with gold thread. On the opposite shore, Octavian's camp stood silent. His general Agrippa watched the horizon, studying every move, every shift of wind. Their ships were smaller, faster, built for strategy, not spectacle. For days, the two forces waited, windless skies, tense silence, each side testing the other's will. Antony trusted in his courage, Cleopatra in her symbols, and Octavian in his patience. 3 rulers, 3 visions, 1 world ready to burn. At night, Cleopatra walked the deck of her ship, the stars mirrored in the calm sea. She looked toward Antony's campfire glowing faintly across the water. For a moment, she let herself believe they could still win, that love could defy empire. But as dawn crept over the horizon, the sky turned from gold to crimson, and from the Roman fleet came the sound of horns, low, steady, and merciless. The Battle of Actium had begun. Dawn broke over the Ionian Sea. The sky shimmered with gold, but the waters below waited, still, silent, and tense. On one side stretched the might of Mark Antony and Cleopatra. More than 200 ships, their decks heavy with warriors and treasure. On the other, Octavian's disciplined fleet, smaller but sharper, commanded by his brilliant general Agrippa. 2 empires faced each other across a sea that would decide the future of the world. The wind died, the sails hung limp, and for a heartbeat, time itself seemed to stop. Then came the signal, the long, mournful sound of the Roman horn. Antony's fleet surged forward. Massive Egyptian galleys, gilded with gold and bronze, cut through the water like beasts. Flaming arrows arced through the sky. The first crash of hulls echoed like thunder as oars splintered and men screamed. The Battle of Actium had begun. Cleopatra's flagship, enormous and dazzling, glided through the chaos. Her purple sails unfurled, her banners bearing the sun and the moon. From her deck, she watched calmly, her expression unreadable, her eyes fixed on Antony's command ship across the water. Antony stood at the bow, his armor shining, his voice hoarse from shouting orders. He had fought battles in snow, sand, and storm, but never one like this. The air was thick with smoke, and the cries of drowning men filled the windless sea. Agrippa's ships struck in waves, smaller, faster, surrounding Antony's giants, striking their oars, setting their decks ablaze. Each time Antony tried to advance, the wind betrayed him. His massive ships were trapped in their own splendor, too heavy, too slow. He looked toward Cleopatra's fleet, still waiting behind his line, her sails shimmering in sunlight. He had asked her to hold until the signal. But as the tide turned, she saw what he would not. The battle was lost. Then suddenly her sails shifted. Her flagship turned with the wind and began to pull away. One by one, the Egyptian ships followed, fleeing toward the open sea. From Antony's deck, the sight struck like a blade. For a moment, he froze. Disbelief, fury, heartbreak, all crashing at once. "Cleopatra, no," he whispered. His officers shouted that she was retreating, that the battle could still be saved if they held formation. But Antony was already lost. He ordered his ship to break line and follow her. The soldiers screamed in protest. The captains begged him to stay, but he could hear nothing beyond the roar of the burning sea and the beat of his own heart. Behind him, his fleet collapsed. Without command, the line shattered. Fire spread across the decks, masts toppled, and the sound of victory rose from Octavian's side like a storm. By dusk, the waters of Actium burned red and gold, ships drifting like torches on an endless sea. Octavian watched from his command post on the hill, arms folded, face calm and expressionless. He had not won by courage. He had won by patience. As night fell, Antony's ship disappeared into the horizon, following Cleopatra's golden sails toward Egypt. He had lost his army, his fleet, and his future, but not his heart. Octavian looked out over the smoldering sea and said to his men, "Rome has defeated its last enemy. The world is ours now." Yet in his eyes, there was no joy, only calculation. He knew that what had ended here was not just a battle. It was an era. The next morning, the smoke still hung over the sea like a shroud. Seabirds circled the wreckage, the water blackened with oil and ash. On that silent, broken shore, the Roman Republic finally died. And in its ashes, the first emperor of Rome began to rise. The fires of Actium still smoldered when the lovers returned to Alexandria. The once proud city, jewel of the Nile, stood silent, its harbors empty, its people weary. The Queen of Egypt had lost her fleet, and the man she loved had lost himself. Mark Antony was no longer the Lion of Rome. He wandered through the marble halls of the palace like a shadow, his armor tarnished, his eyes hollow. He had given everything for love, his loyalty, his honor, his command, and now all of Rome laughed at his name. But Cleopatra did not weep. She watched him quietly, regal and composed, already planning how the world would remember them. In the distance, the banners of Octavian advanced, his legions marching through the deserts, unstoppable, merciless. He called it peace. But peace under Rome was built on the ashes of kingdoms. When Octavian's fleet reached the Egyptian coast, Cleopatra sent envoys offering surrender. She would yield Egypt, but not herself. Octavian's reply was simple: "You will live to walk in chains through the streets of Rome." That night, Antony gathered his few loyal men. He refused to be paraded like a conquered slave. Drawing his sword, he turned it upon himself. But the blade faltered. His strength failed. Wounded, he called for his servants to carry him to Cleopatra. In the high tower overlooking the Nile, she received him. The doors were barred, the room dimly lit with oil lamps. When Antony saw her, he managed a faint smile. "I found glory once," he whispered. "Now I find peace in your arms." Cleopatra's voice trembled, but her eyes did not. She held him as his breath grew shallow, and when it stopped, she closed his eyes and said, "Rome may take my crown, but it will never take my story." 3 days later, Octavian entered Alexandria. The city bowed without resistance. He walked through its silent streets like a man inspecting his inheritance, the world itself. In the palace, he demanded to see Cleopatra alive. She agreed, but on her own terms. When Octavian entered her chamber, he found her sitting upon her golden throne, adorned as a goddess, calm, radiant, and unbroken. The faint scent of lotus filled the air. She spoke softly, almost kindly. "You have conquered Egypt," she said. "Now conquer mercy." Octavian offered her a place in Rome's triumph, as a trophy. She smiled. Queens are not trophies. That night, she prepared her final act. She bathed, dressed in shining gold, and sat beneath a window where the moonlight touched her face. At her feet lay a woven basket filled with figs, and beneath the figs, her freedom. A small sp, sacred serpent of Egypt, coiled silently inside. Cleopatra reached for it with steady hands. To her, the serpent was not death, it was reunion, it was victory. She pressed it to her skin. A single bite, a breath, and then stillness. When Octavian returned, he found her seated upon her throne. Her crown in place, her face serene, her beauty untouched by death. At her feet lay 2 servants, fallen beside their queen. The conqueror stood in silence. He had won the world, but the woman he sought to parade had already conquered immortality. Weeks later, Octavian returned to Rome. He carried the treasures of Egypt and the ashes of an era. The Senate hailed him as Augustus, the exalted one. The Republic was dead. An empire had begun. On the shores of Actium, the sea still shimmered gold beneath the sun. Where love drowned, power rose, and a new world was born. He ruled the earth. She ruled the heart. And between them, history learned the price of empire.